Sifting through Half-Life mods to find something half decent can often be a tiresome ordeal, and when you find something playable it can then seem redundant to criticise it. Firstly because it's free, and secondly because it's created by people often doing it simply because they have so much goddamn love for the source game. Case in point is a mod for Half-Life called Paranoia, a good mix of action and horror, and it feels like it was made by people who are both very skillful at creating content for the Gold Source engine, and who are also huge fans of the Stalker series. It was developed and released in 2007 by a group appropriately called Paranoia Team, where you play as a major in the Russian Special Forces, with things starting off during just another day at base camp. After a short tutorial sequence, sirens start blaring and you're sent into a mysterious research facility with your squad to stop a bunch of terrorists from shooting up the place. From this point you'll learn that there's more going on here than meets the eye, and there's some kind of genetic research carried out in some old laboratories which has turned the place to shit. Despite initially just shooting other people with guns, you're eventually up against zombies and other horrific creatures as you try to make your escape. You'll spend a fair bit of time interacting with people as they try to explain current and past events, but things move so fast that it can often be difficult to keep up to speed. Paranoia does do a decent enough job of telling its story, but the problem is that the game is all voice acted in Russian, meaning you're forced into reading subtitles. Now, this isn't a huge issue, but if you're concentrating more on the game during combat, for instance, than the text that's popping up on the screen, it's often easy to miss a story-related piece of dialogue. Now, I can't really comment on the voice acting as I don't speak Russian, and I'm not going to be some kind of pretentious asshole and pretend I know whether or not it's good or bad, but I can say that the other sound effects are pretty top-notch. There's a great ambient soundtrack when you're just walking around, and some cheesy but still appealing heavy metal music kicks in during gunfights. The weapons also sound pretty good as well, and are modelled with a nice amount of detail. On that note, when you first load up Paranoia, you'd be hard pressed to tell that this is a game running on the Gold Source engine. As is the case with most games on the Gold Source engine, the way it shows its age the most is with the character and weapon models, which are noticeably low polygon. The textures really get the job done for the most part, though there's little variety, which again isn't a huge deal considering the game is set in a single location. The actual architecture for some of the areas shows off a high amount of creativity, and the layout is straightforward without feeling like a series of corridors. Certain enemies are clearly just reskinned from other Half-Life games, featuring the same animations, but they're entirely unique visually, and some of the zombie and mutant looking type enemies are a frightening sight to behold. I guess the only issue there is that there's just not enough of them. I mean, there's one enemy type in the game that you literally kill once and never see again. You know, someone went to all that effort of modelling this horrible looking monstrosity that would make HP Lovecraft fill his trousers. Then you kill it off and you never see it again. Paranoia is a really short mod, like maybe 1 to 2 hours short. Right around the time that the shit hits the fan and all the ugly mutants and zombies appear, it's not too long after that the whole thing just comes to an end. You spend a significant chunk of the game shooting at other soldier type enemies where you mostly just shoot at them from behind cover or rush their positions, which is pretty standard FPS gameplay. Nothing amazing, but nothing horrible either. Against these guys you can pull down your ballistics helmet to protect yourself from headshots, which can make the difference between dying in a couple of hits to dying in a dozen or so. You've also got a flashlight, which is pretty standard, and a gas mask, which I think you're required to use all of 2 times in the entire mod, once of which is part of the tutorial. The shooting in this game seems to have taken a bit of a lead from the Stalker games, where bullets don't really go so much as where you're aiming, more so they kind of fire out in a cone-like arc around your crosshair. The initial bullet should ideally hit what you're aiming at, but I often found this to not be the case. I think that firing a shot at a time does improve your accuracy, but I just found it easier to close the gap and fire at a much closer distance. Obviously certain weapons have different amounts of accuracy and recoil, but it's often hard to tell where each bullet hits, so I just found myself kind of firing off a couple of shots until whatever I was shooting at went into a visible death animation. You're pretty much always fighting alongside other Special Forces soldiers as well, who will frequently and brazenly block your movement, even having the audacity to tell you to move out of their way. Like, try joining up to the army in real life, block a major in a doorway, and then see what happens if you tell him to move out of your way. I don't think that would end very well. Also, if these guys get killed in combat, it's a game over Sonny Jim, so there's a bit of a focus on keeping them near and making sure they don't get killed when things get out of hand. Having said that though, you have to really try to get them killed, like unassisting them up against half a dozen enemies as an example. All in all though, I can't really fault the shooting all that much. I mean, it is what it is. One thing I don't like is how slow the player snaps into iron sights, and also that you can't snap out of iron sights when you're reloading. You have to interact with corpses to pick up ammo, and the area to interact with is really small. Otherwise, as I said, it's pretty standard type stuff. It's just that the mod really shines more during those moments when you're up against the zombie type enemies, where it's generally a lot more tense. And I guess I just kind of wish they milked that aspect of the campaign a lot more, instead of filling it up with combat against generic enemies with guns. Harking back to what I said earlier, the other issue I think is that when the mod ends, it all just kind of ends. It doesn't ever really get that winding down feeling, and then after you take out the end boss, if I can call it that, you're just told the mission is accomplished and it fades to black. I mean, that's pretty much it. Paranoia is like a half-made Reuben sandwich. It's got the sauerkraut, the Swiss cheese, and the corned beef, but it's missing the rye bread holding it all together, giving it shape and purpose. I don't think it's a bad mod, but it just kind of feels like it's lacking something. But the overall amount of polish with most aspects of the whole thing really sets it apart from a lot of other mods available. And again, it's free, so you're not really losing anything playing it aside from your time. I can also think of a lot worse mods out there as well. So if you're sitting on a computer, refreshing the same 4 or 5 tabs over and over and trying to think of a way to pass the time, then maybe give Paranoia a go. There are definitely worse ways to pass the time.